Dr. Kim Tae-ho wiped the sweat from his forehead as he squeezed through the narrow passage of the Karahan Caves in Turkey. The ancient limestone walls seemed to whisper secrets from thousands of years ago. His team of 5 researchers followed, closely behind, their headlamps cutting through the darkness like tiny suns. "Professor, the readings are getting stronger," called out Lee Min-seo, the team's geologist, as she checked her electromagnetic scanner. The device was beeping faster now, almost like an excited heartbeat. Tai-ho had been chasing these strange energy signatures for 3 months. Satellite scans had picked up unusual electromagnetic patterns deep underground, patterns that didn't match any known geological formations. Most scientists would have dismissed it as equipment error, but Tai-ho had learned to trust his instincts over his long career. "This way," he said, following the scanner's guidance down a path that seemed to spiral deeper into the Earth's belly. The air grew cooler with each step, and strange shadows danced on the walls from their moving lights. After 20 minutes of careful descent, they reached a place where the natural cave walls suddenly changed. Instead of rough limestone, they found themselves facing a smooth, almost mirror-like surface that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "What is this material?" whispered Park Ji-woo, the team's youngest member, reaching out to touch the wall. "Don't touch anything yet," Tae-ho warned, but his own curiosity was burning just as bright. He had never seen anything like this in 30 years of archaeological work. The smooth wall stretched up beyond their lights, disappearing into darkness above. As they moved their beams across the surface, they could see it wasn't just a wall. It was curved, like they were standing beside some enormous buried structure. "Professor, look at this," Min-seo called from their left. She had found what looked like an opening, a doorway that seemed to have been sealed for countless years. Together, they managed to push the entrance open. The moment they stepped inside, emergency lighting flickered to life automatically, bathing everything in a soft blue glow. The team stood frozen in amazement. They were inside a crystalline chamber that looked like something from a dream. The walls were covered in intricate patterns that seemed to move and shift when they weren't looking directly at them. But what stopped their hearts completely was what lay in the center of the room. A transparent pod about 7 feet long sat on a raised platform. Inside, they could see the perfectly preserved form of what was clearly not human. The being appeared female, but her skin had a beautiful blue tint that seemed to glow from within. Delicate patterns covered her body like living tattoos, pulsing gently with soft light. "Is she alive?" Ji-woo asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Tae-ho approached the pod carefully. The being's face was peaceful, almost like she was simply sleeping. Her features were similar to human, but more refined, more elegant. Long silver hair floated around her head as if she were underwater. "The preservation is impossible," Min-seo said, checking her instruments. "According to these readings, this chamber is at least 10,000 years old, but she looks like she was placed here yesterday." Tae-ho couldn't help himself. Despite all his training and caution, something drew him forward. His hand reached out toward the pod's surface, as if pulled by an invisible force. The moment his palm touched the smooth crystal, everything changed. Ancient symbols exploded to life all around the chamber, covering every surface with flowing script that seemed to write itself. The pod began to hum with energy, and the being's chest rose and fell with her first breath in 10,000 years. Her eyes opened, glowing with light that seemed to come from another world entirely. The being's eyes fluttered open and closed several times, like someone trying to wake up from the deepest sleep imaginable. Her breathing was shallow and quick, almost panicked. The soft blue glow from her skin patterns pulsed erratically, sometimes bright, sometimes dim. Tae-ho stepped back from the pod, his heart racing. "Everyone stay calm," he whispered to his team, though his own voice was shaking. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crystalline pod began to open with a soft hissing sound, like air escaping from a sealed container. Sweet-smelling vapor drifted out, carrying scents that reminded Tae-ho of spring flowers and ozone after a thunderstorm. The being tried to sit up, but immediately collapsed back down, her body trembling. She looked around the chamber with wide, confused eyes that seemed to hold starlight. When she saw Tae-ho and his team, her expression shifted from confusion to something that looked almost like hope. She opened her mouth and spoke, but the sounds that came out were unlike anything they had ever heard. The language was musical, with tones that rose and fell like singing, but the words were completely foreign. "Can anyone understand what she's saying?" Taiho asked his team. Minseo was already pulling out her portable translation device, a piece of equipment that could analyze speech patterns and compare them to known languages. She held it toward the being and waited as it processed the strange sounds. The being noticed the device and seemed to understand what it was for. She spoke again, this time more slowly and deliberately. The translation device beeped and displayed partial results on its screen. "It's picking up fragments," Minseo said, reading from the display. "Something about long sleep and waiting and 10,000 cycles?" The being pointed to herself and said a word that sounded like music. "Nira." Then she pointed to Tai-Ho and tilted her head questioningly. "I think she's asking for your name," Jiwoo said. Tai-Ho pointed to himself and said clearly, "Tai-Ho. My name is Tai-Ho." Nira repeated his name several times, as if tasting the sounds. Then she smiled, and when she did, her whole face seemed to light up with warmth that made the chamber feel less strange and frightening. Over the next hour, through a combination of gestures, simple drawings in the dust on the floor, and the slowly improving translation device, they began to communicate. Nira's confusion was heartbreaking to watch. She kept looking around as if expecting to see other people, and when she realized she was alone, sadness filled her glowing eyes. She drew pictures in the dust, figures that looked like her, but taller and different. Males of her species, Tai-Ho, realized. She drew many of them, then crossed them all out with sharp, angry strokes. The translation device caught fragments of her explanation. Plague, death, all gone. "Luminar," she said, pointing to herself and then to the crossed-out figures. "My people, Luminar." The story that emerged was tragic beyond imagination. Nira's race, the Luminar, had once been a thriving civilization that traveled among the stars. But a terrible genetic plague had swept through their population, targeting only the males. Within a single generation, every male of their species had died. Nira drew herself lying in the pod, then pointed to symbols on the chamber walls. The translation device picked up the word catalyst several times, along with hope and salvation. "She was waiting," Minseo said quietly, "waiting for someone who could help save her people." But then something amazing happened. Nira approached Tai-Ho and gently took his hand. The moment their skin touched, her patterns flared with brilliant light, and her eyes went wide with shock and wonder. She spoke rapidly in her musical language, and the translation device worked overtime to keep up. Words appeared on the screen. Compatible. Genetic harmony, an impossible miracle. Nira stared at Tai-Ho as if she was seeing a ghost. She touched his face gently, almost reverently, and whispered something that the device translated as, "You are the key." Over the next few hours, Nira's strength slowly returned. She could stand now, though she still moved carefully, like someone learning to walk again after a long illness. The blue patterns on her skin had stabilized into a steady, gentle glow that lit up the chamber with soft light. As her body recovered, something else was happening to her mind. Memories that had been locked away for 10,000 years began to surface like bubbles rising in still water. At first they came in fragments, flashes of images that made her gasp and press her hands to her temples. Tai-Ho watched with concern as Nira experienced what looked like intense headaches. "Are you okay?" he asked, reaching out to steady her. When she swayed, "Memories," she said, her pronunciation of human words getting clearer by the hour. So many memories coming back. She walked to one of the chamber walls and placed both hands flat against the crystalline surface. Immediately the wall responded, displaying moving images like a three-dimensional movie screen. Tai-Ho and his team watched in amazement as scenes from another world played out before them. They saw a beautiful planet with 2 suns, covered in cities that floated in the clouds and towers that reached into space. Beings like Nira moved through these cities, some with her blue skin, others with different colors, all glowing with those same intricate patterns. My home, Neera said softly. Before the plague. But then the images changed, showing something that made Taiho's breath catch in his throat. The scenes shifted to show Luminar ships arriving at a younger Earth, back when early humans were just learning to make tools and control fire. We came here, Neera explained, her voice filled with ancient sadness. Not as conquerors, but as, how do you say, gardeners. The wall showed Luminar scientists working with early human populations. They were gentle, careful, treating the primitive humans with respect and kindness. But more shocking was what came next. The images showed Luminar and humans living together, and children who looked like a mixture of both species. You mixed your genetics with ours, Minseo breathed, understanding flooding her face. Neera nodded. We gave gifts to your ancestors, longer life, better minds, stronger bodies. We hoped that someday, if our peoples met again, we could help each other. Jiwoo stared at the images. Are you saying that we're part alien? Not alien, Neera corrected gently. Family, distant family, but family. The implications hit Taiho like a lightning bolt. This explained so many mysteries about human evolution. The sudden leaps in intelligence, the unexplained gaps in the fossil record, the way humans seem to adapt and grow faster than natural selection should allow. That's why you can sense my genetics, he said. That's why I'm compatible with your species. Yes, Neera said, turning to look at him with those starlight eyes. Every human carries a small piece of Luminar heritage, but in you, it is stronger, clearer. You are like a bridge between our peoples. But as she spoke these words, something unexpected began to happen throughout the chamber. Systems that had been dormant for millennia suddenly came to life. Panels lit up along the walls, displaying streams of information that moved too fast for human eyes to follow. The floor beneath their feet began to vibrate, and a low humming sound filled the air. What's happening? Taiho asked, trying to keep his balance as the vibrations grew stronger. Neera's expression changed from wonder to alarm. She pressed her hands against another wall panel, and her eyes went wide with shock. No, she whispered, this cannot be. The chamber walls became transparent, and suddenly they could see the truth. They weren't just in a buried room. They were inside something much larger. Through the transparent walls, they could see vast corridors, enormous chambers, and machinery beyond human understanding stretching out in all directions. This entire cave system, Neera said, her voice barely audible. It's not a cave at all, it's a ship, a Luminar mothership. The humming grew louder, and lights began to flicker on throughout the massive vessel. Systems that had been sleeping for 10,000 years were waking up, responding to Neera's presence and the genetic resonance between her and Taiho. The ship is activating, she said, fear creeping into her voice. It's doing what it was programmed to do when a catalyst was found. What was it programmed to do? Taiho asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Neera looked at him with eyes full of ancient sorrow. Send a signal across the galaxy. Tell every surviving Luminar colony that the catalyst has been found. That salvation is possible. She paused, and her next words chilled him to the bone. But it will also tell our enemies where we are. The signal that burst from the buried mothership was invisible to human eyes, but Neera could feel it like electricity in her bones. She stood, frozen at the control panel, watching streams of data that meant nothing to Taiho and his team, but everything to her. It's too late, she whispered, her glowing patterns flickering with distress. The message is already traveling faster than light. Every Luminar colony within 1,000 light years will know within days. Taiho saw the fear in her eyes and moved closer. Isn't that what you wanted? To contact your people? Neera's laugh was bitter and filled with pain. Yes, but not like this. Not so loudly, not so carelessly. She turned to face him, and he could see tears gathering in her starlight eyes. You don't understand. When the plague destroyed our males, it wasn't natural, it was created. She moved to another wall panel, and new images appeared. Dark, angular ships that looked like they were made of shadow and sharp edges. Unlike the graceful curves of Luminar technology, These vessels seemed designed to inspire fear. The Shadow Fleet, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They came from the dark spaces between stars, from worlds where no sun shines. They hate life, hate growth, hate anything that creates instead of destroys. The images showed battles in space, luminar cities burning, and worst of all, laboratories where Shadow Fleet scientists worked on something that glowed with sickly green light. They studied us for years before they struck, Neera continued. They learned how our genetics worked, how we reproduced, how we lived. Then they created the perfect weapon, a plague that would kill our males but leave the females alive to suffer. Jiwoo stepped forward, his young face pale with horror. But why? What did your people do to them? We existed, Neera said simply. We were capable of mixing our genetics with other species, of creating new forms of life, of helping other civilizations grow and prosper. To the Shadow Fleet, this made us the greatest threat in the galaxy. The implications hit Taeho like a physical blow. And now they know we exist. They know humans carry luminar genetics. Neera nodded, fresh tears flowing down her blue cheeks. The signal doesn't just tell my people where to find hope. It tells the Shadow Fleet where to find their next target. As if summoned by her words, new alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The walls displayed a three-dimensional map of local space, showing dozens of small dots moving at incredible speeds toward their solar system. Shadow Fleet scout ships, Neera said, reading the display with growing alarm. They must have had watchers at the edge of your system, waiting and listening. They're already on their way. Mincio checked her watch with shaking hands. How long do we have? Neera manipulated the controls, calculating distances and speeds that human minds could barely comprehend. Their scouts will reach Earth's outer planets in 6 days. The main fleet, she paused, double-checking her calculations. 2 weeks, maybe 3. The chamber fell silent, except for the humming of awakening systems. Taeho felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. His simple archaeological expedition had accidentally triggered what might be humanity's extinction. There has to be something we can do, he said. Some way to fight back. Neera looked at him with something that might have been admiration. Your species always was brave. Even when my people first met your ancestors, humans never backed down. From a challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. She moved to a new panel, and the images changed to show more of the buried ship's interior. Vast weapon systems, shield generators, and technologies that looked like magic were scattered throughout the massive vessel. This ship was designed as an ark, she explained, but it was also built for war. The Luminar who placed me in stasis knew the Shadow Fleet might find us eventually. They prepared for that possibility. The ship's systems continued to wake up around them, lights flickering on in sections that had been dark for 10,000 years. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of massive machinery coming online. But there's a problem. Neera continued, her expression growing darker. These weapons were designed to be operated by both Luminar and human crews working together. The ship needs the unique combination of our genetics to function at full power. Taeho understood immediately. You need more than just me. I need an army, Neera said, looking at him with desperate hope. I need humans who are willing to bond with Luminar technology, to let it change them, to become something new. Only then can we hope to stand against what's coming. Through the transparent walls, they could see more and more sections of the massive ship coming to life. But 6 days wasn't much time to prepare for a war that would determine the fate of 2 species. Then we'd better get started, Taeho said, his voice steady despite the fear in his heart. The next morning brought terrible news from space observatories around the world. Astronomers were reporting strange objects moving past Jupiter, at impossible speeds, heading directly toward Earth. The Shadow Fleet scouts had arrived earlier than expected. Neera stood before a massive control panel deep within the ship, her hands trembling as she accessed files that had been sealed for millennia. The blue patterns on her skin pulsed with frantic energy, reflecting her inner turmoil. There is a way, she said quietly, not looking at Taeho or his team. The ancient scientists, before they put me in stasis, they created something, a final solution. She activated a holographic display that showed complex genetic structures spinning in the air, like beautiful, deadly flowers. The patterns were mesmerizing but somehow frightening at the same time. "What am I looking at?" Tejo asked, though something deep in his stomach told him he didn't want to know. "A genetic catalyst," Nira whispered. "Using your DNA, I can create a compound that will spread through Earth's atmosphere like pollen on the wind. Every human who breathes it will be changed." The implications hit him like a punch to the gut. Changed how? Nira finally turned to face him, and her eyes were filled with such pain that it was hard to look at her. "The Luminar genetic code would activate in every human on Earth. Your species would become capable of reproducing with mine. The sterility plague that destroyed my people could be cured forever." "But?" Tejo asked, knowing there had to be more. "But humans as you know them would cease to exist," she said, her voice breaking. "Everyone would become something new, part human, part Luminar. Your children would be hybrids. Your grandchildren would be even more changed. Within 3 generations, pure humans would be extinct." The chamber fell deadly silent. Minseo dropped her tablet, and the clatter echoed like thunder. Jiwoo sank into a chair, his face pale with shock. "You're asking me to choose between your species and mine," Tejo said slowly. "No," Nira replied, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "I'm asking you to choose between my species and yours, because if we do nothing, the Shadow Fleet will destroy both of us anyway." As if to emphasize her point, new alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The main display lit up with tracking data that made everyone's blood run cold. The Shadow Fleet scouts had passed Mars and were accelerating toward Earth. 18 hours, Nira read from the display. "They'll reach Earth's orbit in 18 hours. Tejo walked to the observation window and stared out at the stars that had suddenly become so dangerous. Behind him, he could hear his team whispering frantically among themselves, trying to process the impossible choice they faced. What would the process actually do to people? He asked without turning around. "At first, very little," Nira explained. "Enhanced healing, longer lifespans, better resistance to disease. The changes would be gradual, spread over decades. Most humans alive today would live relatively normal lives. But their children would be different. Smarter, stronger, able to interface with Luminar technology, able to reproduce with my people and create a new generation that could stand against the Shadow Fleet." Tejo closed his eyes and tried to imagine a world where humanity, as he knew, it no longer existed. No more purely human children, no more purely human culture, no more purely human anything. But then he thought about the alternative. Shadow Fleet ships burning every city on Earth, humanity reduced to ash and memory. "There has to be another way," he said desperately. "I've been searching the databases for hours," Nira replied. "This ship has weapons, yes, but not enough to stop an entire fleet. And even if we somehow won this battle, they would just send more ships. The Shadow Fleet has been preparing for this for 10,000 years." Outside, the first Shadow Fleet scout ship appeared as a dark speck against the stars, but their sensors showed it was massive, easily the size of a city, and it was just the beginning. "How long do I have to decide?" Tejo asked. Nira checked. The genetic processor, a machine the size of a small building that hummed with alien energy. "If we start now, the catalyst can be ready and deployed in 12 hours, but once the process begins, there's no stopping it." Tejo turned back to face her and saw his own impossible situation reflected in her glowing eyes. Save humanity by destroying it, or let it die as it was. The weight of 2 entire species rested on his shoulders, and time was running out. Tejo couldn't sleep. While his team rested in the chambers that the ship had prepared for them, he wandered the endless corridors of the massive vessel, his mind spinning with the impossible choice he had to make. Save humanity by destroying it, or let both species die fighting an enemy they couldn't defeat. The ship's corridors were beautiful but alien, with walls that glowed softly and seemed to respond to his presence. As he walked, he noticed something strange. Some sections felt different, older somehow, as if they had been sealed away for even longer than the rest of the ship. Following his instincts, Tae-ho found himself in front of a massive door that looked like it hadn't been opened in ages. Ancient symbols covered its surface, different from the ones he'd seen elsewhere on the ship. These looked desperate, urgent, carved by hands that were running out of time. "You couldn't sleep either," came Neera's voice from behind him. He turned, to see her approaching, her blue patterns dim with exhaustion and worry. "I keep thinking there has to be another way," he said. "Something we're missing." Neera looked at the sealed door with curiosity. "This is strange. I don't remember this section from the ship's layouts." She placed her hand on the symbols, and they began to glow brighter. "These markings, they're in the old script, the one we used before the plague. Only the most senior scientists knew how to write in it." The door responded to her touch, grinding open with the sound of machinery that hadn't moved in millennia. Beyond was a laboratory, unlike anything they'd seen before. While the rest of the ship was clean and organized, this place looked like its occupants had been working frantically right up until the end. Tables were covered with research notes, genetic samples in crystalline containers, and equipment that hummed with residual energy. Most importantly, holographic displays still flickered with active research data, as if the scientists had just stepped out for a moment. "Look at this," Neera breathed, moving to one of the displays. As she touched, its streams of data began flowing across the air, showing genetic patterns and complex calculations. "These aren't the files I accessed before. This is something completely different." Tae-ho watched as excitement began to replace the despair in her eyes. "What is it?" "It's research from the final days before my people put me in stasis," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. The scientists weren't just working on the catalyst solution, they were developing something else entirely. She moved from display to display, her hands dancing across controls as she absorbed information that had been lost for 10,000 years. They called it the Symbiosis Protocol. Instead of replacing one species with another, they found a way to create a true partnership. "What kind of partnership?" Tae-ho asked, hope beginning to stir in his chest. "Look at this," Neera said, activating a three-dimensional model that showed human and luminar genetic structures intertwining like dancers. Instead of changing everyone at once, the process would be voluntary. Humans who chose to bond with luminar genetics would gain our abilities, enhanced healing, longer life, the capacity to interface with our technology. But would they still be human? "Completely," Neera said, her excitement growing. "The symbiosis doesn't replace human genetics, it adds to them, like gaining a new sense or a new ability. The bonded humans would still be fundamentally human, just enhanced." Tae-ho studied the data, his archaeological training helping him piece together the implications. "And your people. Those who bonded with human genetics would regain fertility, but they would also gain human adaptability, creativity, and resilience. Both species would become stronger while remaining themselves." Another display showed the projected results over generations. Unlike the previous solution that would have eliminated pure humans, this one showed both enhanced and unenhanced humans, coexisting peacefully. Some would choose the bonding process, others would remain unchanged, and both would contribute to a richer, more diverse civilization. "But there's more," Neera continued, accessing deeper files. "The bonded individuals wouldn't just be enhanced, they would form a kind of network, able to share knowledge and coordinate actions on an instinctive level. Perfect for fighting an enemy like the Shadow Fleet." "How many people would need to undergo the process?" Tae-ho asked. Neera ran calculations on a nearby console. "To operate this ship at full capacity and defend Earth effectively, maybe 1,000 humans, bonded with an equal number of Lumina. Survivors from the colonies that will respond to our signal. 1,000 volunteers instead of 7 billion unwilling subjects," Tae-ho murmured. "People who choose to become something more instead of having it forced on them." "Exactly," Neera said, "and the process is reversible in the early stages, so if someone changes their mind..." For the first time since this nightmare began, Tae-ho felt like he could breathe properly. How long would it take to prepare? Neera checked the equipment in the laboratory. Much of it was still functional, maintained by the ship's automatic systems. 8 hours to modify the genetic processes, But Tejo, there's something else you need to know. What? The first bonding has to be between us, she said, meeting his eyes. The process needs a perfect genetic template to work from. You and I would have to undergo the symbiosis together, becoming the foundation that all other bondings are based on. Tejo looked at her, this alien woman who had become so much more than that over the past few days. She wasn't asking him to save her species by destroying his own anymore. She was asking him to help both species become something neither could achieve alone. Then let's do it, he said. Outside, Shadow Fleet ships continued their approach toward Earth, but for the first time since they'd awakened, Nira smiled with genuine hope. The bonding process was unlike anything Tejo could have imagined, and Nira stood in the center of the ancient laboratory, surrounded by glowing pillars that hummed with energy older than human civilization. The genetic synthesizer wrapped them both in fields of soft light that felt warm and alive. "Are you ready?" Nira asked, her hand finding his. The moment their fingers touched, Tejo felt something electric pass between them. Not painful, but powerful, like touching a live wire made of starlight. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The process began slowly. Tejo felt warmth spreading through his body, starting from where his hand touched Nira's and flowing outward like water. His vision sharpened, colors becoming more vivid than he'd ever seen before. He could hear his heartbeat, Nira's breathing, even the hum of machinery throughout the massive ship. "I can feel your thoughts," Nira whispered, wonder in her voice, not reading them but sensing them, like an echo. Tejo nodded, experiencing the same thing. He could sense her emotions, her hope, her fear, her determination to save both their peoples. But more than that, he could feel something vast awakening, like a sleeping giant stirring to life. "The planetary network," Nira gasped, her eyes wide with amazement. "It's responding to our bond. I can sense everything." Through their enhanced connection, Tejo suddenly understood what she meant. Earth wasn't just a planet that the Luminar had visited long ago. It was a fortress they had prepared, equipped with defenses that had been sleeping for 10,000 years, waiting for the right genetic key to activate them. "Look," Nira said, directing his attention to the displays around them. The screens showed a three-dimensional map of Earth, but it wasn't the planet that humanity knew. Hidden beneath the oceans, buried under mountain ranges, and concealed within the polar ice caps, were massive structures that had been invisible to human detection for millennia. "Defense platforms," Tejo breathed, recognizing some of the locations. "There's one under the Pacific, another in the Himalayas, and that's directly under the Antarctic ice sheet." As their genetic bond strengthened, the platforms began to respond. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, something the size of a city started to rise from the abyssal depths. Whales fled as water displaced by the ascending structure created waves that would puzzle oceanographers for years to come. In the Himalayas, what climbers had always assumed was just another mountain peak split open like a flower, revealing crystalline weapon arrays that began charging with energy that made the aurora borealis look like a candle flame. "The Shadow Fleet doesn't know," Nira said, her voice filled with fierce satisfaction. "They think they're approaching a defenseless world. They have no idea that Earth is one of the most heavily fortified planets in the galaxy." But even as the defensive systems came online, Tejo could sense something else happening. The genetic bond between him and Nira was sending out a signal, a call that reached far beyond Earth's atmosphere. "The Luminar colonies," she explained, reading his confusion. "They're responding. I can feel them changing course, heading here instead of fleeing deeper into space." Through their connection, Tejo could sense ships accelerating through hyperspace, carrying the survivors of Nira's people. They had received the signal and were coming to help defend Earth, bringing with them technologies and knowledge that humanity had never dreamed of. "How many?" he asked. "Not many," Nira admitted. "The plague left so few of us, maybe 50 ships carrying a few thousand survivors, but each one of them has capabilities your military can't imagine. On Earth's surface, things were starting to change in ways that would soon be impossible to hide. The rising platforms were causing seismic disturbances that seismologists couldn't explain. Strange lights were appearing in the sky as long-dormant energy systems powered up. "We need to contact world governments," Tejo said, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "They need to know what's coming." "Already done," Nira replied, showing him communication arrays that were broadcasting on every frequency humanity used. "The ship's computers are sending detailed information to every major government and military installation on the planet. They'll know about the Shadow Fleet, about us, and about the choice they have to make." "What choice?" "Whether to trust us and work together, or to fight a war they can't possibly win alone," she said simply. Through their bond, Tejo could sense the chaos that was about to engulf the world. Emergency meetings were being called in every capital, military forces were being mobilized, and somewhere in the depths of space, the Shadow Fleet was accelerating toward what they believed would be an easy conquest. But Earth was no longer the defenseless world it had appeared to be. Ancient weapons were awakening, allies were coming from the stars, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Luminar had hope. The real battle was about to begin. The Shadow Fleet arrived at Earth like a plague of locusts descending on a green field. Their ships were massive, dark vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Through the enhanced senses his bonding had given him, Tejo could feel their malevolent presence like ice water in his veins. 200 ships, Nira reported from the command center, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "More than we expected, but fewer than they sent to destroy my homeworld." Tejo stood beside her, marveling at how different everything felt now. His mind processed information faster than ever before, seeing patterns and possibilities that would have been invisible to him just days ago. The genetic bonding had enhanced not just his physical abilities, but his capacity to understand complex situations. "The first wave is moving into attack position," reported Colonel Park Sung-min, the highest-ranking military officer who had volunteered for the bonding process. Like the other enhanced humans, his tactical awareness had increased dramatically, allowing him to coordinate with both human and Luminar forces seamlessly. Through the ship's sensors, they watched as the Shadow Fleet formed their battle formation, a spreading arc designed to surround Earth and rain destruction down from every angle. It was the same strategy they had used to destroy dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. "They're confident," Tejo observed, watching the enemy ships move with leisurely precision. "They think this will be easy. Let's show them how wrong." "They are," Nira said, her hand moving to the activation controls. "All defensive platforms prepare to engage." What happened next would be remembered as one of the greatest surprises in military history. The Shadow Fleet had scanned Earth extensively before beginning their attack, but their sensors had only detected human technology, satellites, missile systems, and nuclear weapons that posed no real threat to their advanced vessels. They had no idea that beneath Earth's surface lay weapon systems that had been designed to fight wars among the stars. The first platform to fire was the one hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean. What looked like empty water suddenly erupted with energy beams, so powerful they lit up the night sky like artificial suns. The beams reached into space at the speed of light, striking 3 Shadow Fleet ships before their crews even realized they were under attack. The enemy vessels' shields flared and failed instantly. 2 ships exploded in brilliant fireballs that could be seen from the ground, while the third spun out of control, its hull breached and atmosphere venting into space. "Direct hits on the lead squadron," Sung-min reported, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to track the battle at speeds no unmodified human could match. "Enemy shields are weaker than expected." But the Shadow Fleet recovered quickly from their surprise. Their remaining ships began evasive maneuvers while returning fire with weapons that could crack planets. Beams of dark energy struck Earth's defensive platforms, testing shields that had been built to withstand exactly this kind of assault. "Platform 7 is taking heavy damage," one of the Luminar coordinators reported, shield strength down to 60%. The battle quickly became a dance of destruction above Earth's atmosphere. Luminar ships arrived through hyperspace portals, their elegant vessels moving like silver fish through the darkness. They were outnumbered 10 to 1, but each ship was crewed by survivors who had spent 10,000 years dreaming of revenge against the Shadow Fleet. Meanwhile, enhanced human pilots were launching in fighters that combined human engineering with Luminar technology. These hybrid craft were faster and more maneuverable than anything either species had built alone, piloted by volunteers whose bonded genetics allowed them to interface directly with their ship's systems. Tae-ho watched one such pilot, a young woman named Lee Soo-jin, who had been among the first to volunteer for enhancement. She flew her fighter through a maze of enemy fire, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to dodge weapons that moved at near light speed. Her ship's luminar weapons struck a Shadow Fleet cruiser's engine section, causing a chain reaction that tore the massive vessel apart. "The enemy is adapting faster than we hoped," Nira observed, watching as Shadow Fleet ships began concentrating their fire on Earth's defensive platforms. "They're targeting our stationary installations. Then we make them pay for every shot," Tae-ho replied, feeling the cold fury of battle settling over him. Through their genetic bond, he could sense Nira's people's ancient pain and rage at what the Shadow Fleet had done to them. But he could also feel something new, hope, burning bright as the defensive battle raged. The most crucial moment came when a Shadow Fleet dreadnought, a ship the size of a small moon, broke through the outer defenses and began approaching Earth directly. Its weapons could sterilize entire continents, and it was heading straight for the most populated areas of Asia. "All available units, converge on the dreadnought," Sungmin ordered, but everyone could see that their remaining forces weren't enough to stop something that massive. That's when Tae-ho made a decision that would change everything. "Nira, can this ship fight?" She looked at him with surprise, then understanding. "It's not just a mothership," she said, her eyes lighting up with possibility. "It's a battleship, the most advanced one my people ever built." "Then let's remind the Shadow Fleet why they were afraid of the Luminar in the first place." The ancient Luminar mothership rose from the caves of Turkey like a mountain taking flight. For 10,000 years it had waited beneath the earth, and now it climbed toward the stars with purpose that burned like fire in its crystalline heart. Tae-ho stood on the command bridge, his enhanced senses allowing him to feel every system coming online. The ship was massive, easily 3 times larger than the Shadow Fleet dreadnought that was bearing down on Earth, but more than size, it carried something the enemy could never understand: the combined will of 2 species fighting for their shared future. "All weapons powered and ready," Nira announced, her hands dancing across controls that responded to her thoughts as much as her touch. "The ship recognizes both our genetic signatures. It's operating at full capacity for the first time since it was built." Through the viewports, they could see the Shadow Fleet dreadnought growing larger as it approached Earth. Its dark hull bristled with weapons that had destroyed countless worlds, and energy readings showed it was charging its planet killer. "Cannon, target their main weapon," Tae-ho ordered, feeling the weight of command settle naturally on his shoulders. The genetic bonding had enhanced more than just his physical abilities. It had awakened leadership qualities he never knew he possessed. The mothership's primary weapon fired, and space itself seemed to crack. The beam that emerged was pure, concentrated starlight, carrying the power of a small sun. It struck the Shadow Fleet dreadnought's main cannon just as it was about to fire, causing an explosion that lit up the entire solar system. The enemy flagship reeled backward, its hull cracking along multiple stress lines. For the first time in the battle, the Shadow Fleet seemed stunned by the magnitude of resistance they were facing. "This is impossible," came a transmission from the enemy command ship, speaking in the ancient Luminar language. "The weapon makers are extinct. We saw to that personally." "We are not extinct," Nira replied, broadcasting on all frequencies. "We are reborn, stronger than before, and we are no longer alone." What followed was the most decisive space battle in recorded history. The combined human Luminar fleet fought with coordination that seemed almost telepathic, enhanced crews sharing information and tactics at the speed of thought. Shadow Fleet ships that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia found themselves outmaneuvered by fighters they couldn't catch and outgunned by weapons they couldn't understand. The turning point came when Colonel Sungmin led a squadron of hybrid fighters in a direct assault on the Shadow Fleet command ship. The enhanced pilots moved through enemy fire like they could see the future, their bonded genetics allowing them to anticipate attacks before they were even fired. "We're breaking through their defensive screen," Sungmin reported, his voice calm. Despite flying through what should have been certain death, moving to engage the command bridge. The Shadow Fleet's leadership, creatures of pure malice that had never known defeat, watched in horror as their perfect formation crumbled. Ships that had conquered star systems were being destroyed by defenders they had dismissed as primitive and weak. When the command ship exploded, taking with it the fleet's coordination and communication systems, the remaining Shadow Fleet vessels began to retreat. They fled toward the outer edges of the solar system, their dark ships disappearing into hyperspace one by one. "Let them go," Tejo said when Nera suggested pursuit. "They need to return to their masters with a message. Earth is no longer defenseless." The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of what they had accomplished. Not only had they driven off humanity's first alien invasion, but they had done so with minimal casualties. The genetic bonding process had enhanced human reflexes and healing to the point where even badly injured pilots could recover from wounds that would have been fatal just days before. More importantly, they had proven that the partnership between humans and Luminar could work. Enhanced humans reported feeling more creative and intuitive, while bonded Luminar had gained human adaptability and determination. Neither species had been diminished, both had been elevated. "Look at this," Nera said, showing Tejo communication arrays that were lighting up with incoming signals. Messages from across the galaxy. Worlds that have been hiding from the Shadow Fleet for centuries are reaching out to us. The signals came from dozens of civilizations, some human-like, others completely alien, all united by their fear of the Shadow Fleet and their hope that Earth's victory meant they might finally be free. "They want our help," Tejo realized, reading the translated messages. "They want us to help them fight back." "Not just help," Nera corrected, her eyes shining with possibilities he was only beginning to understand. "They want us to lead. The partnership between our peoples has created something new, a civilization capable of standing against the darkness." Over the following months, as Earth rebuilt and integrated its new technologies, the true scope of their destiny became clear. The genetic bonding process was refined and offered to volunteers from around the world. Some chose enhancement, others remained unmodified, and both groups contributed to a society that was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. Ships arrived weekly from distant star systems, carrying refugees from Shadow Fleet attacks, and representatives from worlds seeking alliance. Earth, once isolated and unaware of the larger galaxy, had become a beacon of hope for countless civilizations. Standing on the observation deck of the mothership as it orbited Earth, Tejo and Nera watched construction crews building the first interstellar defense stations. Human engineering and Luminar technology working together to create fortifications that would protect not just Earth, but any world willing to stand against tyranny. "Do you ever regret it?" Nera asked quietly. "The choice to bond with me. To change humanity's path forever?" Tejo looked at her, this alien woman who had become so much more than that, and smiled. "How can I regret something that gave birth to hope for an entire galaxy?" Above them, stars that had once seemed distant and cold now beckoned with promise. Humanity had found its true calling among them, not as conquerors, but as guardians, protecting life wherever it tried to flourish. The age of humanity as guardians of the galaxy had begun.